And welcome back to another episode of Pokemon Knowledge. It's about that time of year again. Here we are in March of 2023, and I feel like nobody's really had to do. What I want to try to do on today's video is I want to see if I could debate both sides of this issue. And the reason why I want to do that is because I want at the end of this video, I want you to be able to take your own conclusion of whether or not you think Pokemon's in a bubble or not. And I think it's very easy to debate one side of an argument, whatever side you lean heavier towards. Me personally, I definitely lean towards Pokemon's not in like a bubble, or maybe not in a bubble the way it might seem from the outside looking in, or at least not the traditional bubble. But I'm going to do my best today to argue both sides of this conversation. So an example of this would be this is just a real loose example of what I'm going to try to do on today's video. So one of the arguments that a lot of people say when they say we are not in a bubble is they say, well, look at how much of these booster boxes are selling. Look at how many of these ETBs are selling. You have just so many more people have entered this hobby, and those amount of people that have entered this hobby are all buying up this product. That's why this product isn't sitting on the shelves. That's why none of this is available, because of the large mass of people. Just imagine how many booster boxes need to be bought up if you have, 10,000 people join and everybody just picks up one booster box, and then that's 10,000 extra booster boxes that the market now has to, be able to deliver to the market, and then all these people are going to absorb. Now, the counter argument for that is, in reality, maybe there isn't that many people actually joining the hobby as some people might think, and maybe in fact that it is just a smaller amount of people acquiring, more product today than they have at any other point in the hobby. Meaning, if we're in the historic of this hobby, you only had your very small, less than 1% of this hobby was acquiring multiple booster boxes. Now, maybe the amount of people acquiring multiple booster boxes or multiple ETBs is now 5 or 10%. So imagine this. If you had 10 people and each one of those 10 people bought one booster box, that is still less than 2 people acquiring 7 booster boxes per person, or even one case. Because if you had 10 people buying one, that's 10 booster boxes. But if you have 2 people just buying one single case, so 12 booster boxes, those 2 people are actually a stronger demand on the market than those 10 people. So that's the argument. Now, the truth is, and where I fall, is I think that the truth kind of lies somewhere in between. I think that both of those situations are, in a way, kind of correct. I do think, one, there are just a lot more people entering this hobby, buying up a lot of this product, especially in this example when we talk about modern. But I also think that there is a greater number of people that are just now acquiring massive positions in this stuff. At least, positions that we're not used to in the history of this hobby. Like I explained, very few people would even pick up one booster box of sets, let alone pick up cases, or what I would consider positions, multiple cases. So I think the answer, like I said, lies in between. I think it's a combination of both. And that's what I'm going to try to do on this video. I want to try to give both sides of the argument, but I hope that you guys could somehow find an area in between, because I don't think that there are any answers in this hobby, especially when you talk about bubble talk or anything like that. I don't think that there is any correct answer on any extreme of the spectrum. But like I said, today's video, I'm going to do my best to argue both sides. So I don't know what side I'm going to start with, so I just got a coin. And I say, if it's a heads, I'm going to say Pokemon is in a bubble. That's what I'm going to start with. If it's tails, I'm going to start with Pokemon is not in a bubble. So I don't know what it's going to be, but I literally have no clue. So I'm just going to flip it. So, whatever that is. What is that? Hold on. I got to pull up my camera. So, heads. So, we're going to start off this video that Pokemon is in a bubble. And then for the second half of this video, I'm going to go again. I'm going to do all the opposite. I'm going to say why Pokemon is not in a bubble. And I will tell you right now that there will be people out there that will only listen to whatever half of this video they want to listen to, whatever works with their mindset. If they think Pokemon's in a bubble, they're only going to listen to the second half. If everybody, thinks Pokemon, it's just, they're just going to go against me and whatever I say. So I guess the first half of this is, if Pokemon is in a bubble, I would say one of the biggest dangers we could be facing is kind of that situation I laid out earlier, where if you have all these people, acquiring massive positions, it doesn't take a lot of product to be dumped onto the market at one time to really cause like an almost instant downturn in market pressure. And there's a lot of examples like that, especially some of these more recent Sword and Shield sets, which we've really seen like a lot of growth in. Sword and Shield base, I think, is a good example. Rebel Clash is a great example. There's not a lot of those booster boxes really selling on the market, and it's pretty much less than one a day. And that's when you when you look at eBay, when you take into TCG Player, maybe if you added those two different platforms together, maybe it's 2 a day. But, Mason from Cardinal Gaming was able to pull the numbers a couple months back, and it was only, I think it was either the month of December, month of January, or only 21 booster boxes of Rebel Clash had sold on TCG Player, meaning that entire platform, it was less than one booster box per day. Now, eBay obviously is a much larger platform, so it's probably a little bit more selling on there. But if you have somebody who has positions of, 6 cases of Rebel Clash booster boxes, which in reality is not a lot of booster boxes, they could very easily, push those booster boxes onto the market and create new floors. And the problem with this hobby, which we find very often, is that very quick race to the bottom. And you see it with modern slabs. You can see it with booster boxes, especially booster boxes right at release. There's always that very small group of people that more or less set the floor of the market. We talk about Football Pete all the time. He's one of those great examples. When he has his very first initial waves of distribution, he's more or less setting the floor on a lot of these prices. And that, as I walk through the valley of the $79.95 booster boxes, and I fear no evil, every time I mention that, every time I talk about that, I'm talking about Chill and Rain. It was him. He was that eBay account that made those booster boxes for Chill and Rain $79.95. And then there was so many like LGSs and people that were maybe, a little over leveraged on their positions because he was so cheap on eBay. Everybody else had literally no option but to start dropping their prices and more or less fire selling a lot of this product. And trust me, there was a lot of people out there that did believe Chill and Rain was a good product, and they probably shouldn't have been selling it between that $70 to $85 price, but they had no other choice because they just could not compete with this, monster in this hobby who's just selling all these boxes and drove down the prices. And I want to say his total was close to 5,000 booster boxes sold of Chill and Rain. 5,000 booster boxes is a lot. And again, that's coming in the peak of demand when that is still a relatively new set. But what you will have is you'll have a product like a Rebel Clash or a Sword and Shield base that maybe the demand is not there right now. So as those booster boxes start hitting the market harder and harder, a lot of people will start to see all their imaginary gains, because at the end of the day, all profits in Pokemon, if you haven't pulled those profits out, they are strictly unrealized gains. They are nothing more. They are unrealized gains. I don't care what your gains are on paper. If you don't sell, you could potentially be down. We see that happen all the time with modern cards being graded. More times than not. First cards to market, especially like these very new modern PSA 10s, first to market, price is always the highest. And there can be a lot of people that, did that play. They were like, all right, I pulled this, or maybe not even pull. Let's just talk about like special delivery Charizard. They were one of the very first people to get their special delivery Charizard. They looked at it from Pokemon Center and they said, wow, I think this is a 10 candidate. They sent that baby away at $50. They were super lucky. They hit a 10. And they looked at what the market was doing. Those cards were selling for greater than $600, and they graded theirs at $50, and they said, you know what? I think this card maybe is going to continue to go up. Let me sit on this card. And then they just watch sale after sale after sale, drop on that special livery Charizard to now, here we are, which we're now far removed from those special delivery Charizards really being a play because they were a free promo. But now here we sit months later, and that card is still selling for what I consider an extremely high premium for what that card is. But it's far away from that $600 it was selling at. And then that's just what happens when you have greater supply on the market. Eventually, those prices get beaten down. So that guy that might have graded that card at $50, hit a 10, could have sold it at $600. Those gains he had in that card have been wiped away because they were all unrealized gains. So if you don't take advantage of the market when it's hot, that's all that is. So I think that is the danger of booster boxes. So I'm just going to real quick say this. This is a lie for anybody watching this after the fact. Again, I do want to just mention the fact that I'm going to do two things in this video. I'm going to debate that Pokemon is in a bubble, and I'm going to debate that Pokemon is not in a bubble. We flipped a coin at the beginning of this live. We happened to just flip heads, and the head said to talk about how Pokemon is in a bubble. So that's what we're starting with. And then, I think a lot of people's arguments for Pokemon when they talk about the being in a bubble is they talk about what can easily become irrational exuberance. And what do I mean by that? The irrationality in it comes where people just say everything goes up no matter what. And right now, they are 100% correct. There is no denying that. Everything in this market more or less has gone up. It's actually harder to find things that have gone down opposed to finding things that have gone up. It is actually harder to find those things that have dropped. But what happens is sometimes people ignore, a very long period of time in this hobby where product stagnated for years. I have an entire short series. I have this book right here. This book right here is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. This is from January 2003. And inside here, you can literally pick up booster boxes of base set, jungle, fossil, base set 2. There's Neo Destinies in here. They got the gyms for $59.99. Or sorry, $59.95. And that is January 2003. That means Pokemon came out in 99. So you got 99, 2000, 2001, 2003. That's a 4-year timeline where that base set booster box had actually lost money for that 4-year timeline. So yeah, that is the danger. And I think when people argue against, saying Pokemon's in a bubble, I feel like a lot of people ignore those periods of time in this hobby. They only ever want to look at like 2020 and prior. And I can see where that can be a huge problem for people, because when you ignore the past and you only look at the today, what you're saying is that it's impossible for the past to repeat itself. And if anybody is a study of history and study of the past, one thing you will learn in history class is it's always important to learn about history so people don't repeat themselves. And like people talk about that all the time. There's just so many examples throughout history where people make the same mistake and history just repeats itself. And that could be a danger. And to say that that is not a danger, you are ignoring everything. You think about how many cards Pokemon has produced in the last, couple years. Numbers that were recently thrown out last year was like 9.1 billion cards. That is a lot of cards. What does that entail? Does that entail every single energy packet that was included in everybody's ETBs, energy bricks that were sent with like pre-release packets to game stores? Probably. And then out of that 9.1 billion, how many of those cards are truly the chase cards? Meaning, out of those 9.1 billion, how many of those are your alternative arts? How many are your Moonbreons or your Charizard Vs and stuff like that? And yes, we made it 14 minutes before Moonbreon got mentioned. But how many of those chase cards? And then, people break down and they start looking at pop reports and stuff like this, and they say, well, you got about 5,000 Moonbreons graded. There's probably realistically maybe close to 100,000 of those. These are just numbers we completely pull out of our ass. And how do we get to that? Because we just throw out arbitrary numbers that we expect. Only about 5% in this entire hobby are actually grading cards. And to be honest with you, when you really look at the macro of this hobby, and you include every person, when you include like the 9-year-old and the 8-year-old who are just picking up a couple packs on a weekend because their mom and dad are buying them packs from Target the same way our parents bought them Target on a Saturday morning from Target. It actually might be way less than 5% of the entire hobby grades cards. So if that's the case and there's 5,000 of those graded and that number might be less than 5,000 or 5%, and it might actually be more than 100,000 of those Moonbryons exist. We don't know. So I'm just going to tell you right now, every single 8-year-old, 9-year-old that bought their, 3-pack blister of Evolving Skies off the shelf when it came out and they were lucky enough to pull the Moonbryon, those kids aren't grading them. They put them in their binder. They did whatever they did with them. Now, we run into this issue too where a lot of people talk about, the bubble of Pokemon is people love to, while I say people can make the mistake of repeating history, people also think that they could like recreate, the history of this hobby. Because realistically, when you look at a lot of these more vintage cards that are extremely expensive, there was a lot of things that went into those cards. A lot of like, for some of this vintage stuff that we really look at as being super sought after, super rare, super scarce, there are different factors that go into vintage than they do modern. That big one being condition rarity. And if you don't believe me, you could look at pop reports of unlimited base set holos. There is a reason why the PSA 10 population is so drastically low for how many of those cards exist. When we say that there might be 100,000 Moonbryons potentially available on the market, when you talk about these base set holos and there was 15 holos you can pull from a booster box, 16 holos total for the set, but that Machamp came from the 2-player starter deck. The numbers we have been given for that 2-player starter deck for that Machamp is 2 million 2-player starter decks. That means there are potentially 2 million of those Machamps that exist. For those Charizards, Raichus, Ninetales, Poliwraths, just Alakazams, Clefairies, Chanseys, Charizards, you just go through the list. There could be millions of each one of those cards. Millions. But with that said, millions of those cards, when you look at the PSA 10 rate of those, even cards that are super readily available, a perfect example would be, I have it sitting back there, the Mewtwo. The Mewtwo came out of Zap theme decks. Even that card there only has a PSA 10 population and an unlimited, less than 700. And then that makes you sit there and you scratch your head. You say, whoa, whoa, whoa. You just said there could be a million of those cards that exist. But you're telling me only 700 of them, even after all this time of grading, exist in a 10? Yeah, the reason why is because those cards, first of all, print quality of those, while they were actually okay, they weren't fantastic. Gem 10 rates were pretty low, but a lot of those cards got destroyed by kids because kids were literally like snot-nosed kids putting those things in their back pocket, not sleeving them. They were probably bindering in them, but they weren't, poor binder etiquette, stuff like that. Those cards were destroyed. Now, and then the same thing goes to a lot of these later Wizard of the Coast sets. So when you get out of your base set Jungle Fossil, base set 2, Team Rocket, and then it starts to really drop off with your gym sets, and then, you got your Neo sets, and you look at, like, what all these Shinings are doing, and you ask yourself, like, all right, even with Neo, like, Neo Destiny was still printed to a decent amount. Why are there not more of these Shinings out there? And if they do exist, why are they not in better condition? Because at that point, the hobby started to die down a little bit. And then especially when you got into those later Wizard of the Coast sets and you start to look at Legendary Collection, and popularity had really dropped off there. A lot of people didn't like the reverse holo pattern of Legendary Collection, and really Legendary Collection was just another reprint, and people had just seen a reprint of base set in base set 2. That's all Legendary Collection was. It was just a reprint again of base set Jungle Fossil. Nobody wants to open another reprint. And then when you look at your Expeditions and your Aquapolis Skyridge, by that point, popularity of these cards were so drastically low. And then when you look at something like Skyridge and the print numbers for that, we know it was low. WotC lost the rights. So Skyridge came out in May of 2003. Ruby Sapphire came out like June or July of 2003. So you only have 1 to 2 months where WotC was actually printing Skyridge until their printers stopped going on burr mode and they just went up from the on position to the off position. That's why some of those sets are so hard to come across. They just don't exist. Now, people see all that. Even though I explained all that to you, I just spent 5 to 10 minutes explaining why those cards are actually inherently rare. People will just say, well, all these cards ended up doing good in the future. All this modern stuff is instantly going to do well in the future as well. But that could be wrong. And that could be extremely wrong, especially when you look at stuff that a lot of people now look at some of these sets like black and white. People like to call it pseudo vintage, actually vintage. Like, I don't really know anymore where people fall within black and white. I have a feeling like people, because they never happened to open black and white, maybe that was part of the hobby, like a timeline of the hobby that they were not in, so they didn't experience it. And because they didn't experience it, they look at it as like a vintage. But you look at some of this black and white stuff, even black and white base with your first ever full arts, or just go one set later into Emergent Powers and look at the value of Emergent Powers cards, the actual raw cards in there. They have like almost no value, at least no value in relative to the pack price. Even Emergent Powers booster pack sells for greater than $50 to $100 for a loose pack. So where that price is coming from, you would think is strictly like a sealed product play, like people just want it for the pack art or whatever. But I still to this day will occasionally see somebody like open up Emergent Powers pack and it's just like, what are you doing? Like, why do you open any of this stuff? Like, just go get the chase card. Like, literally whatever the best card of that set is, just go out and pick it up raw. And especially if you are not a condition collector, meaning you don't care about PSA 10 prices and you are fine with just binder copies. So binder copies like PSA 7, listen, if you're fine with PSA 7s, you literally can open up 99.9% of this entire hobby on like almost no budget. Especially a lot of this Heart Gold Soul Silver stuff, Heart Gold Soul Silver, like even your legend cards worth nothing, in light play condition. Your primes, you go look at primes in PSA 6 or 7 prices. They're absolutely nothing. So if that is the case, and today's cards start getting looked at very similar to those, and 10 years from now, they're worth the same, if not less than they are today. Because one of the things you will find out about modern cards is people in Pokemon, especially in modern Pokemon, they only love whatever is the shiniest, newest thing for the most part. Now, that's not completely true, because when you look at like, I don't want to get into like defending modern yet, because that will be later in the video. So I do see we have some more people enter this. Probably be the last time I say this. In today's video, I'm doing something very, very hard. I want to debate both sides of the bubble issue. I want to debate that Pokemon is in a bubble, and I want to debate that Pokemon is not in a bubble. We flipped a coin. We started off with Pokemon is in a bubble. At the second half of this video, I'm going to talk about why Pokemon's not in a bubble. And to be honest with you, I do believe that the answer falls somewhere in between. But, yeah, I mean, and then, so this is a problem with being in bubbles too. For a hobby to sustain itself, you need that the new collectors that are joining need to have true love for this. Now, this is a very scary thing, because I think a lot of people see what Pokemon did in 2020, 2021, 2022, and they think it just keep repeating itself from now into inevitability, meaning there will be no slowdown, no break of that. What people don't really understand when it comes to Pokemon is pre-2020, Pokemon was on a very clear uphill trajectory We had that crazy spike, which was 2016, but in relative to 2020 was almost nothing. But after 2016, you had a lot of people leave, but there was a lot of true demand that stayed around post 2016 and continued into early 2020. And then, we had catalysts that happened late 2020 with the Logan Paul box break and what happened with the shutdowns and everybody rediscovering Pokemon and all this. People call it perfect storm, black swan event, whatever you want to call it. This is the problem with that, is that that demand that was created before that was a very strong group of people, like people that were really getting deep into Pokemon. And then what happened is when you have all these and then because of that deep demand those people had, they were, I wouldn't say it artificially, they were organically increasing the prices for all this stuff. So when you have all these new people come piling in, they start to see these prices that were in fact organic, but they took years to get there. And then when they instantly joined, they now started adding potentially 5-10 years worth of price appreciation to a lot of this product. And there's a lot of examples out there where we've seen product that between 2020 and 2023, where we are today, we've seen some product not 1x, 2x, we've seen some products 20x. And that is, a lot of that product is people that are newer to this hobby and they just don't understand price points. And the problem is if you don't understand price points, you might not actually understand if a product is inherently truly rare or scarce. If you just think it's something that, if you like it because everyone else likes it, but you don't know any of the fundamentals of what exists in that product, or why did that price get to the price it was early 2020 before everybody jacked it up to the moon. If you don't understand all those fundamentals, all your investments you're doing are based off of somebody else's research and somebody else's logic. But the scary part of that is if you base off all your investments off somebody else's logic, their logic might be based off of other market factors before the boom. And then it will be where the danger could potentially come in with this bubble cycle where, people come in, they pick up this product, they start to see it go up. They don't understand really why it's going up. They just see everybody else likes it. And then once any sort of pullback happens, they don't know what to do. And then they may not understand why is that product actually going down? Because if they don't understand the fundamentals of why that thing jacked up in price, they're for sure as hell not going to understand when a price starts going down. They're going to have no clue. And if they are in this hobby just for that investing aspect, just for that money, and they don't truly love this hobby, it's very easy for them to sell. I always say, there's a very small part of me that wishes that I had absolutely no love for this hobby and I had no love of collecting or nothing, and that I was just strictly a buyer and seller of this hobby, but somehow still be able to have the knowledge of the markets that I do. If that was the case, I'd be able to very easily sell off all my stuff and probably be able to rinse and repeat that. The problem is I do not have that ability because I love too much of my collection. I have too much stuff that my goal in this hobby is very simple. My goal is to sell the stuff that I'm not as attached to in order to acquire the stuff that are my grails, or the stuff that I do find, very sought after, the things that I want for my personal collection. That is one of the reasons I'm doing a lot of the little plays that I do now. Now, the problem is, too, when you talk about bubbles, and I think one of the big downfalls of this hobby that a lot of people don't talk about enough is, at the end of the day, no one knows what print runs are for this hobby. No one knows how much of a certain promo exists. A perfect example of that would be, listen, I've talked about the plays I'm doing. I talked about easy ones, Scarlet and Violet 001 promos, whether it's Japanese, whether it's English. I talked about the special delivery Charizard play. Talked about, Charizard UPCs, strictly a cannibalized play. Those things are easy. The problem is we don't know how many of these cards truly exist. There is a number of those Scarlet and Violet promos that could exist, could potentially get graded, and could bring those cards, real close to, the raw price to the graded price. Does that happen? I don't know. But when you talk about bubbles, you cannot rule out any of this stuff. And, I think a big product that a lot of people are speculating on, and a product that I hear people probably mention more than anything else, is people love themselves some Evolving Skies. Listen, the most dangerous thing for Evolving Skies is a reprint. And if you don't understand that, you are the definition of living in a bubble. Reprints have crushed products in this hobby. Roaring Skies is a great example. Ultra Prism is a good example. Unlimited base set is a fantastic example. How many prints of unlimited base set were there? Yes, we talk about like, first edition, Shadowless, Unlimited, and then the 99 2000 fourth print. But that's not how many print runs there were. There was potentially 12 to 14 print runs. Nobody truly understands the numbers. I know Rusty TCA Gaming once in a while will talk about one of his sheets that he has. One of his sheets, I believe it's a 99 2000, on his sheet, written in hand, says like 11th print. Meaning we at least know that there was 11 prints of unlimited base set, 11 reprints. And then that was enough product that was reprinted to fill up airport, like hangars full of product. And so much unlimited base set. I am still amazed at the people in comment sections who are still somehow surprised when like random cases of unlimited base set will appear. And people are like, I can't believe that these still exist. Like, how many more are these that exist? And it's like fake numbers that people can't even comprehend, because they'll see a booster box selling for $15,000 and then say, there can't be 1,000 of these that exist. Listen, I personally know people in this hobby that have told me, and I want to say that they were on my lives where people were asked this question, and people responded on my live saying that they personally, one person, if they wanted to, could source 1,000 base set booster boxes. Listen, if one person knows enough people that one person can source 1,000 booster boxes, how many more exist that they can't source, that they don't know exist? So there's a number for stuff. And because of large print runs for base set, we saw prices stagnate on that for close to 2 decades, 20 years, people. If you don't understand that this is at least a possibility with Evolving Skies, reprints can crush Evolving Skies. Anybody coming into Evolving Skies, buying it at, greater than $300 a booster box, and going in with that, I think the problem is, and this is where the bubble aspect comes in, where people think that they're untouchable. They cannot be destroyed. They cannot be affected by what this market's doing. They're saying, no, Pokemon's not going to reprint Evolving Skies, and they somehow know it. I've seen that people say that so many times. They're like, there is 0% chance. Yes, I've seen people say or type that exact sentence. There is 0% chance Pokemon will reprint Evolving Skies. Listen, I'm just going to warn everybody right now. Don't ever use the word 0% in this hobby. That is not a percentage. And then, we saw booster boxes get trickled out on Pokemon Center. They got bought up real fast. People speculated if that was a very small reprint or if that was just backstock. To me personally, I think it was probably backstock. But now, what if Pokemon did do a reprint and they just funneled that reprint strictly through Pokemon Center? And every day for the next month, we saw 30-minute windows where Evolving Skies booster boxes dropped on the Pokemon Center. Listen, don't fool yourself. Pokemon is in the business of making money. And they're leaving a lot of money on the table by not reprinting some of this stuff. So don't underestimate their ability to reprint stuff and to literally do their one job for their shareholders, which is make money. Don't underestimate that ability. That is the definition of living in a bubble, is to underestimate Pokemon ability to freaking print product and make money. So that is like the problem with bubbles too, is where when you're living in the bubble and you're living on this uphill thing where everything's going up, I talk about it all the time. It would be you would actually be harder pressed to have lost money in this hobby in the last 3 years than to have made money. Meaning, to actually have lost money, you had to make some really poor, really shitty decisions. Because when you look at stuff in this hobby, every single sealed product, more or less, has gone up, with the exception of like in print, still readily available products on store shelves. So if you're going to say Charizard UPC, yes. The problem is you could still walk into your Walmart and Target and pick those up at MSRP. You can still go online and with very easy searches still pick those up for around $100. I'm going to let you in on a super secret of Pokemon. That if you can pick up stuff on the shelf still available, or pick up stuff, less than MSRP, prices aren't going to go up in the near term. The only way a product like that increases in price is demand has to still stay strong, but that product cannot still be available at distribution. It definitely can't be available at your Walmart and Target, because if they are, prices will just never be able to, do that uphill trajectory. So, but and I think the problem is too, is we run into it is, and when you're in a bubble, you will always be right until you're wrong. And I know how silly that sentence sounds, but it's true. As long as you continue to be right and set after set continues to go up, what could potentially happen in a bubble type situation is you get very greedy. And greed is a real thing in this hobby. So you say, listen, I bought every single set of Sword and Shield. I bought the last 4 sets of Sun and Moon. I bought Team Up. I bought Unbroken Bonds. I bought Unified Minds. I bought Cosmic Eclipse. I bought those last 4 sets. Every single one of them went up. Jesus, look at just my Team Up booster boxes and look at my Team Up ETBs. Look at how much money is just baked into those 2 products alone. And maybe you only picked up like a case of Team Up, and you look back on Team Up and you say, you know what? I made a huge mistake. Should have bought way more than a case. I should have just bought cases upon cases upon cases of Team Up, and I'd be sitting pretty. So now you watch what Sword and Shield did, and you go, you know what? Now my next buy, because I missed out on Team Up, and I missed out on Cosmic Eclipse, and I missed out on Evolving Skies when it dropped down to 95. For all these next sets, I'm just going to do much larger positions, because you're looking at literally every other set, and you go, listen, I can't lose. Those are dangerous words when you're potentially living in a bubble, is the I can't lose. Because it'll only take one set to actually lose on. And when that happens, when that one set happens and people lose money, it could have ripple effects throughout the entire hobby. I have a lot of tinfoil hat theories on why, battle styles might not have played out exactly the way a lot of people thought it was going to. There's a few things. One, battle styles, there was a lot of it. I don't know if it was print to demand or what. Pokemon never really says. I know a lot of people speculate. A lot of people think they know that it was print to demand, but we don't really know. I think the problem is with battle styles fell within that window of time where all these new people entered into this hobby and just bought up so much battle styles right at release. We saw battle styles booster boxes creep up to $160 at release. We saw battle styles ETBs creep up to like $60, $65. The problem is when you have enough people acquiring positions, they could do one of two things. One, paper hand into the market once prices start going down. And then when they start paper handing, you see supply just being higher and higher. Or you have the other option where people they acquire their positions at way too high of dollar amounts. So they're able to hold on to their product. But the problem is they see no reason to acquire more because they've already built that position. If somebody bought their battle styles positions at 143 and they're just going to keep holding on to it, they're probably not in the position where they want to just keep acquiring more of this stuff. They probably don't want a dollar cost average down. They probably don't feel good about that product. They're probably just moving on to the next thing. And I think that was one of those reasons that battle styles is being stagnant for so long, is that I just think a lot of like the new collectors, they actually got what they wanted. And they probably bought so much battle styles that they're probably like financially extended and where they want to be in battle styles, and they're probably uncomfortable with their positions. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of people out there, even people watching this video, look at their battle styles and go, I might have more battle styles than I do any other modern set. Meaning, you just got super unlucky that you have massive positions in one of the worst performing sets. And when you look at battle styles really doesn't have too much going against it. It still does have like alternative arts when we talk about, the alternative art timeline of Pokemon, with the Sleepy Tea. And people might say, well, battle styles is a really shitty set. Yeah, well, you know what else is a really shitty set? Rebel Clash is a really shitty set. And Rebel Clash is doing way better than battle styles. But why is that? It might just be the timeline that Rebel Clash came out. Rebel Clash was early 2020, where Battle Styles was early 2021. And that 1 year timeline of new people entering this hobby, where they might just not have been able to, whatever reason, acquire their positions of Rebel Clash, or the fact that by the time they were ready to acquire their positions of Rebel Clash, booster box prices had already creeped up to like the 120, 130 price range. Listen, you could sleep here, you could sit here all day and say why you think some stuff is going to happen and why some stuff doesn't, and what can be like the real nuances of, modern product and stuff like this. But there is just so many dangers of modern. And, a lot of these, and this is the thing too. When you look at modern and you look at bubbles and you say, what is the best thing Pokemon has going for it right now? The best thing Pokemon has going for it at the time of recording this video, in my opinion, is demand. And I think there's probably a lot of people out there can agree with that the demand in this hobby is what Pokemon has going for it. And what is the one platform that, for whatever reason, time after time after time, is showing that to be true is Whatnot. There's a reason why a lot of the people that I personally know and people that I've talked to, people that I consider friends, when they do go to these Collecticon events, they sit back and they wait for, the end of the day Sunday for these Whatnot buyers that come in and more or less clean out a lot of their supply. The only reason these Whatnot sellers can clean out their supply is because they have somebody they know they can sell it to. Now, how much of this modern product, especially sealed product and stuff, is being open on a daily basis on Whatnot? I have no clue. I can tell you it's a lot, because I've heard from people that sell it's a lot. But the problem is the people on those platforms are not like, I'm sorry to say this, they are not the educated buyers. The people picking up junk slab after junk slab after junk slab, they are not the educated buyer. The people where who will buy your PSA 7s or 8s of super mass produced crap that they could easily just pick up that raw card themselves and grade it themselves, and at a minimum get a 7 or 8. Like, to get 7 or 8s with super modern stuff, you actually have to actually have really bad luck. With modern stuff, for the most part, you're more likely than not going to hit a 10 or a 9. And your chances of hitting that 7 or 8 are actually pretty freaking low when you start looking at pop reports for a lot of this modern stuff. But that could be the thing too, where the Whatnot buyer, that undereducated buyer, that can just be the person artificially keeping up this entire market. The person that will never see a dime from this hobby will just keep pumping money into this hobby and never be able to pull money out of this hobby. I see Quafom's always out there with the massive. I was in the middle of my good rants too. Quafom always with the big super chats. He says, time means nothing in the long run. Pokemon isn't going anywhere. Thanks for another great discussion piece, PK. If you want to succeed and are just getting into the hobby, listen carefully to PK words. This man's knowledge is priceless. I appreciate that, Quafom. So, Quafom, if you're just tuning in now, I'm trying to do something very hard in this video, and something that I don't think anybody's ever tried to do. I'm trying to debate both sides of the argument. For the first half of this video, I'm debating why Pokemon is in a bubble, and that is currently the area I'm in right now, talking about why this could be a bubble. And then the second half of this video, I'm going to do my absolute best to destroy the arguments that I'm putting up right now. So I've never seen anybody actually try to do that before. So this is a first, and we're going to actually see how it turns out. But going back to that whatnot, what I was saying earlier is if you have people who are just putting money into this hobby, they're inflating the entire market as a whole. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it like very clearly. And I don't know how much one platform like Whatnot is really affecting like the macro of this hobby. But I think on like certain products, it definitely is. Charizards in particular, they're definitely affecting the market. Modern Sealed, they're definitely affecting the market. So how long does that last for, though? How long can you have undereducated buyers just throwing their money away? And I don't care how much they think the social aspect or whatever, the fun of just constantly like pack after pack losing money on Whatnot, like that has to eventually run out on them. That cannot be a fun thing to do. Now, what does that mean? What is a way for that to potentially like stay along, though? If Whatnot like continues to keep this market injected with a ton of cash, because right now it is. Whatnot is, listen, I've on eBay, I've sold stuff just the Going Twice, like the Going Twice eBay account. It's a massive account. I think the last time I sold something to them, they had like a 70,000 feedback score. And they're not doing any selling really on eBay that I know of. I think they're doing a bunch of buying. So they're buying on tons of different platforms, trying to get whatever they can just to sell it to people. What happens when that arbitrage goes away and people just can't pick up any slab or any pack and just sell it to their viewers on Whatnot? What happens when that dries up? If that dries up, this bubble will pop and people won't be ready for that. And I'm going to tell you right now with like 100% transparency, I am selling product to Whatnot streamers. The most recent Whatnot streamer I sold product to was when I picked up my most recent case of Evolving Skies from PokemonCenter.com. I was sitting on 2 cases of it, and then I was able to got very lucky. Shout out to all the people that were messaging me on Instagram. Garen M was actually the person that messaged me on Instagram. When he sent me that message, I went on Pokemon Center, picked up another case. That same day, I sold one of my cases to a Whatnot streamer that I know. Cash deal, was able to get money super fast. And I actually got that money before my case from Pokemon Center had even shipped out. Listen, I'm going to tell you right now, when this market is that liquid that I could literally pick up a product at 7 a.m. my time, I knew I was going to sell him that case. I brought that case with me to work. It sat in the back of my car while I was at work, and then I drove to his house at the end of the day and dropped off that case, and he paid me for it. Listen, that is very, very liquid. Like, you don't get any more liquid than that, where you can sell a product in theory before I technically had it in hand, because I already had those 2 cases, and all that one case was doing was replacing that case. This could be bubble type scenario where you can just pick up stuff right away and instantly flip it. That is bubble type situation, because if it's not bubble type situation, you have to be honestly thinking that this could potentially happen in perpetuity, meaning from now until the end of time, that this exact type of market is going to continue to play out, and you're going to see prices compound on a lot of this stuff month after month, year after year. Can Evolving Skies be a $2,000 booster box? I don't know. Don't know. Only reason why is because the people buying Evolving Skies, in my opinion, should have already acquired their positions. I hope that makes sense. So the people that are not, who don't already have positions in Evolving Skies and missed out on literally like 12 different entry opportunities. There was 3 different waves of Evolving Skies. There was some drops on Pokemon Center. There was other drops on Pokemon Center. It's not like there was never a day that there was Evolving Skies. There was a while where Evolving Skies booster boxes were available on Pokemon Center. If everybody lost every single entry opportunity they ever had for a product like this, the question is, who's going to be the person that's going to still want that booster box at $2,000? And why are they still going to want it at $2,000? And why would they have not already acquired their positions? That is dangerous when you get into the bubble talk, thinking that the potential for people to want that product never ends. When you go, and then people will use that argument again to look back at this base set stuff. Listen, the only reason base set booster boxes are expensive now is because it literally took 2 decades for the entire market to be eaten up with the extra supply of that. When base set booster boxes hit $1,000, that was a big deal. That was a big deal. And it took decades for that to happen. So, and you know why it took decades? Because everybody who was in the hobby, who really, really wanted a base set booster box up to that point before prices lost their minds and everything went crazy, anybody who really wanted a base set booster boxes, they had their opportunities to get them. Now, were they always expensive and relative to what they were? Yeah, because you're not going to be opening up those booster boxes really making a lot of money unless you get super lucky, you grade some 10s and stuff. But that's the problem. You just need this influx. You need this new blood to constantly come in and pay irrational prices. So that can be the bubble where you just think that this goes on forever. And you do not believe that this ever could go down. All right. So I think I did that now. So that was the why Pokemon's in a bubble argument of this video. I talked for like 51 minutes on why Pokemon could be in a bubble and how we could just be on the edge of a cliff and getting ready to fall off. Now, I'm going to try to do my best to flip this conversation. And now I'm going to tell you why Pokemon is not in a bubble. All right. So now this is where the positive aspect of this hobby comes from. I think the biggest difference is right now when you look at Pokemon and people talk about bubbles, they love to go back and talk about 99. They say, listen, Pokemon's been in a bubble before and it's popped. And base set booster boxes stayed at $59.99 for years. But you want to know what people don't talk about is why did that bubble pop? What was the real, true meat and bones of why that popped? The reason why it popped is because the people that were collecting in 99 and 2000, they were 9. They were 10. They were in 5th grade. They were, getting ready to move into middle school. And then once they got to middle school, they stopped caring about Pokemon because it wasn't cool to like Pokemon. And because it wasn't cool to like Pokemon, they started going through puberty and chasing after girls and probably failing miserably. And then they went to high school and then they went to college. And Pokemon just took the back burner. Whether they might have had that little spark inside of them, that's all it was. It was a little spark. It wasn't a flame anymore because they just grew out of this hobby. Now, fast forward to where we are today. I'm telling you right now, like, at least in the group I run in, it's cool to like Pokemon. Like, it is. You don't have to feel awkward telling your, freshman in high school friend that you're like real deep into Pokemon and you like this stuff. Like, there's no awkwardness to this. And the social media impact and the social media influence that is now part of Pokemon in the world we live in today is having an impact. Now, are channels like mine having an impact? Probably not on like a huge scale, but I'm sure there is, even like a smaller channel like mine probably has some small impact on the plays people are doing, or maybe not even the plays, just the passion people have in this hobby. There are probably some people that watch videos like mine and they go, you know what? I like that, some adults can sit down and talk about Pokemon. And to be honest with you, I don't know how many hobbies exist like this, or at least in the collectible space, where people can sit down, what it sometimes feels like every other night, and talk for an hour or 2 hours into a camera, just talking about Pokemon. Like, the fact that this hobby is so massive and there's so many little things going on, I don't know if that's possible for any other hobbies. If you guys got a chance to watch one of my most recent shorts, I went to the Pez factory with my kid, and while I was there, I filmed the video looking for Pokemon Pez dispensers. Listen, Pokemon Pez, like Pez dispensers, when I was at that museum, I was looking around, and I'm like, oh, wow, Pez started off in 1920. It started off, I'm a historical master of Pez now because I went to the Pez Museum last weekend. But it started off in 1920 as an alternative to smoking, and it was like peppermint, and it was a German company, and that's where the name Pez comes from, like the P from peppermint and then the E, and then peppermint in German, the last letter is a Z, so then they created those and then became Pez, and then the first ever, like, you know, Pez to be a character and all these little nuances. Pez is a huge hobby, been around since 1920. There's a lot of Pez dispensers that are super expensive. I don't know, even if you're a huge Pez collector, can you sit down and talk every other night for an hour to two on the Pez market? Probably not. I would say that's probably not a thing. I could be wrong because I'm not involved in that hobby, but I just don't know. And maybe sports is like that. But even sports, a lot of the market talks and stuff they would have to be so heavily speculative on like the sports aspect and on rookie players and stuff like this. And I'm sure like the vintage stuff, but I just don't think that there is a community quite like this outside of Pokemon. Or if there are communities like this outside Pokemon, I don't think they're as big. And I just don't think people take into account that enough when they talk about the bubble. I will tell you right now, there are a lot of people that are coming into this hobby, and I mentioned it earlier. A lot of those people that are joining and whatnot that are spending way too much money. Last Pack Magikarp, I appreciate the super chat, man. I think there's a lot of people joining this hobby, and I think they're spending a lot of money. I think they're making mistakes, and I want to sit here and tell you that I think that's a bad thing, but I don't. To tell you the truth, I believe that everybody in this hobby, the best lesson you could ever learn is to make poor decisions. As long as you do the most valuable possible thing after that. If you make poor decisions, as long as you're learning from those decisions, I think you come out better on the other end. I think if you are constantly just getting, in a way, lucky, and every single decision, every single play you've ever made has only 100% played out for you, and you've never made a poor decision, you've never like had anything go bad for you in this entire hobby, that is actually scarier to me. So if you learn from your mistakes in this hobby and you continue to grow in this hobby, I think that this hobby has the potential for the most growth on like maturity level of a hobby. I do believe that. And I think that there are some ways that people like to fresh tat. Appreciate, man. Appreciate the super chat. I do believe that there are some people out there that want to create divides in the community in a way, and they really want to do the vintage versus modern, vintage versus mid-era, modern versus graded versus singles. You know, I'm going to just tell you right now that I do not believe that any of those stuff are individually bad or individually great. I think in order to be successful in this hobby, to really be successful in this hobby, I think you need to be engaging in all aspects of this hobby. Whether that is raw, whether that is graded, whether that is modern, whether that is semi-modern, whether that is vintage. I think you should be engaging in all aspects of this hobby. Now, the fear is that I have sometimes is people will sometimes compare their collections to other people's collections, and they will look at like what somebody who on the highest end of this hobby potentially has and go, you know what, I can never have this, or if I can have this, there's only one way to get there, and I just need to spend as much possible money as I can right now because I'm playing this imaginary game of catch up with these people. But you don't need to do that. I say this all the time. Like, in order to be in this hobby, to be super engaged in this hobby, you do not need like a massive collection. You do not need to own everything. As long as the things you are buying, the things you are acquiring, especially for your personal collection, as long as they matter to you, and I talk about this all the time. One of the things you'll hear me say on this channel a lot is I talk about collection identity. As long as your collection has an identity and you actually enjoy what you have, you're going to grow in this hobby, but this is the beautiful thing about growing. It's so massive that it's almost impossible to complete all your goals. And, I mean, I look at a guy like Zach, Gemmint Pokemon. You think about how successful he's been in this hobby, how much of a grind he's done in this hobby. He's now completed his master set of literally every single WotC holo ever graded in a 10, which is ridiculous. But you look at like the collection or the buys he's doing now, he's buying super obscure errors. You know, things that people aren't even on people's radars, like color variations of print runs and stuff like this, glossy layers, missing layers, potential ink stains, like very different type of collector. But even for him, he's still discovering stuff that is new to him that he never knew about. So even when you get to a level like Zach and you've literally completed one of the most lofty collection goals anyone in this hot stuff, that is still interesting to him. Last pack Magikarp, appreciate the super chat. He said, I know you can't see the future, but what does your gut tell you about how the Celebrations UPC will do in 10 to 15 years? I think Celebrations UPC is going to be dependent on, you know, so your question was on the Celebrations UPC. I think it's going to do fantastic. I think Celebrations UPC, I think a lot of the price has already been like accounted for in the short term. And I try to look at products that are what I consider relatively similar to the Celebrations UPC. And I like to look at the Hidden Fates Ultra Premium Collection. How the Rayquaza artwork, that figure that's inside that Hidden Fates box, always broke. Those Hidden Fates Ultra Premium Collections absolutely suck to store. If you are sitting on multiple of those, they're very similar to like the Celebrations Pikachu VMAX figure collection box, like super square, super bulky, can't stack anything on them. They more or less take up like one cardboard box by themselves. They suck to store. Celebrations UPC maybe don't suck as bad to store, but the problem with Celebrations UPC is they don't display great. Like even like the Charizard UPC, at least the Charizard UPC has the Charizard artwork on the side. The Celebrations, they don't display great. What's going to help Celebrations in the future are they going to be those metal cards inside. Will we ever see PSA start grading those again? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, CGC did start grading those. It's really going to depend on how well do those metal cards do in the future. If those metal cards continue to have these strong premiums, then yeah, that Celebrations UPC will just keep going up in price because people will always just have that thought in the back of their head, even though their percentage chance of that Charizard metal card inside that UPC being a perfect 10 at CGC, while their chance of that might be 1 in every 10,000 Celebrations UPCs. Listen, there's people out there will still think that maybe that one Celebrations UPC has that perfect metal Charizard inside of it. So it's going to do well. Now, what is it going to do in like right now? You've already seen huge gains in a product like that. Problem with that product too is it was very limited at release. There was a lot of people who wanted Celebrations UPCs who were actively engaged in this hobby, actively trying to pick those up at MSRP and just were not able to do it. So it's just tough. I mean, I think they're going to do fine though. I think if you're sitting on those, I would say that is one of the best modern investments. But the problem is like I said, it's kind of cheating already because of how much those price. I mean, you pick those up at 119. Like, what are they selling at now? And Celebrations is a fantastic set. And so those Celebrations UPCs had a ton of Celebrations packs in it. Had a ton of regular packs in it too. It's an all-around solid product. And Celebrations UPC, ironically, is the only product that I do not think I've ever heard anybody talk negatively about. So I think it's going to do good though. So, Dark Lava Lizard said, no one ever wants to believe vintage is a long-term play. I don't know why people say that. When you look at the cards that are some of the most expensive cards in the hobby, a lot of them are these vintage cards. And listen, Modern's doing its thing. We saw what that Black Label Moonbreon did, that 12K at PWCC auction. Was it an actual seal? I believe it's a seal. If you guys know Mertz is a great guy. Met him when I was down at Denver Collecticon. He typed onto the PWCC Instagram page, asked him if that 12K sale was real, and the PWCC Instagram account did reply back to Mertz and said yes, that 12K sale was paid for. So I do believe that it's sold. So with that said, what are your other 12K cards? Really? most of them are vintage. When you look at your first edition 10s, those are your 10K plus cards. You know, especially like your Blastoids, your Venusaur, the Charizard, the big three. Or when you look at Skyridge, you know, there's been a lot of sales of that Crystal Charizard between $10,000 and $15,000. Listen, I remember when this Crystal Charizard had its first ever sale for $5,000 on a PWCC auction, and that was a big deal when that Crystal Charizard sold for greater than $5,000. It was a big deal. Now we're seeing tons of sales of that card floating between $10,000 and $15,000. So, like, why people think that there's no future in vintage or like isn't the long-term play, I don't know. I think maybe like the argument people would have that vintage is not the long-term play is because so much price has already been built into the price of vintage. I think that is the troubling thing. I think somebody will see a card like the special livery, or I said special livery. Wow. Somebody will look at a card like that Crystal Charizard from Skyridge, and they'll say, "Yeah, that card's selling between $10,000 to $15,000. Like, I'm not going to see like a 1X. Is that going to be a $30,000 card? Am I going to see that card double?" The answer is probably no to that. But then people probably said that when it was at $5,000 and it made it to 10. You know, when that sale of 5,000 happened, everybody was probably like, "Is that card ever going to hit 10,000?" Probably not. But the problem is people don't realize that for a while that Hollow Charizard from Skyridge was selling for $40. How much money has been made from the guy who picked up for $40 and that card is now worth $15,000? I think that is the problem when people start to look at vintage. They don't realize like, oh, yeah, that was a $40 card, wasn't it? Now it's worth $15,000. They don't look at that. They just look at it as being a $15,000 card. So they just assume modern doesn't have, or vintage doesn't have this ability to continue to just grow in price because like they weren't around for the, you know, every single thing that took that card to get from 40 to 15,000, they weren't around for any of it. So they don't understand what like true price appreciation is on some of this stuff. They are, a lot of the times when it comes to modern, I think people are very blinded by every modern card just goes up, which in fact isn't really even the truth. Like, there's been a lot of modern cards that have just drastically gone down in price, and while they're still very expensive for what they are, I don't know what like uphill trajectory is for modern. But now this could be the thing where, because at this point in this video I'm talking about the positive, so I got to get back to the positive of modern. The thing we might be underestimating is how good Sword and Shield is. Sword and Shield is arguably one of the best like timelines Pokemon has ever done. And I think it's Dan Catchmole Collectibles always says, never underestimates Pokemon's ability to art. And I think every set that comes out, people are always like, I think just as recently as like we've seen the leaks for that new alternative art Magic card. That's going to be in like one of the new Scarlet and Violet sets. Everybody lost their minds with that Magic carpet. It's like, oh my God, Pokemon, they're just ardent. And we are just always amazed at this. Now, people might look back on Sword and Shield and look at the artwork and look at the sets and look at the way these sets were designed and say this was one of the best periods of Pokemon ever. I think one of my fears is I always like, just like how I like collections to have identities, I like sets to have identities. And I think there are a couple sets in the Sword and Shield block that are maybe lacking a little bit on that set identity when you start to look at all the chases and stuff. But then there are other sets that have strong set identity. Evolving Skies is one. You know, yes, there's the Rayquaza in there, which is the alternative, which is really expensive. But then the main bulk of that set are all the evolutions, and so Evolving Skies has a very clear set identity. Or you look at a set like Brilliant Stars, and Brilliant Stars gives off that big, hardcore, like Flash Fire type vibes with a bunch of Charizards in it, which people don't even talk about the fact that Brilliant Stars actually has more Charizards than Flash Fires. It has one more Charizard than Flash Fire. And then Brilliant Stars has that set identity. But the thing is Brilliant Stars has this set identity because it has like this awesome, character subset to it. The same way Cosmic Eclipse is, first of all, just a absolutely overpowered set. But one of the things that gives Cosmic Eclipse that true identity to it is the fact that it had those character rare cards to it, that first ever character rare. Or when you go back not too many sets before and you look at Team Up and you say, Team Up has real set identity because Team Up has what's in the name. Team Up has, Team Up Pokemon in it. It has a very strong set identity. And so and then you rewind a little bit before that and you start getting into your XY and you look at like Phantom Forces and you look at like the Phantom Forces and the booster boxes and you look at like, your Gengars and stuff like this and you go, wow, that set had real set identity. Or you look at a Flash Fire and literally it's in the name of the set, Flash Fire, and it had Charizard on the booster box, it had Charizard on the pack artwork, and it had Charizard as all your chase cards. That is true set identity. Or even a set, fast forward to modern Pokemon, you look at like your Hidden Fates, very strong set identity, Gen 1, but then fast forward a little bit more into the Sword and Shield block, which I was mentioning earlier. Shining Fates has a ton of shining Pokemon. It has true set identity to it. And then when you look at Shining Fates and you say, what is the chase card? It's a shining card and is a shining Charizard that's in there. Now, there are sets that lost a little bit of that set identity in Sword and Shield, and maybe that those sets won't be looked at as strongly. I think of like a Rebel Clash. Rebel Clash doesn't have much set identity to it. The same way I look at like a Crimson Invasion. Crimson Invasion doesn't have a strong set identity to it. It's a hodgepodge of different cards. It has 2 good trainers in it, and then it has that, hyper rare Gyarados in it, but there's not a lot of set identity to Crimson Invasion. And then the same thing when you go back and you look at one of the more poor performers in XY and you look at like a Steam Siege or something. And Steam Siege, what does Steam Siege has? It has like Steelix. Again, it has a couple good trainer cards, but Steam Siege didn't have set identity. But then you look at like one of the latest best performers of XY and you look at Evolutions and you go, Evolutions had set identity. Whether or not people like that set, whether or not people were burnt out by that set, whether or not it was just another reprint of base set, it doesn't change what it was. That thing has set identity to it. That set identity is it's a reprint of base set and it has identity. Is it borrowing from older sets? Yes. Does it still have some awesome chase cards? Yes. Does it have like secret rare cards that are not really that hard to pull, like your Surfing Pikachu and your Flying Pikachu, which again, let's not forget what those cards are. Those secret rares are still reprints of Black Star promos, and Black Star promos have their own set identity to it, those original 53 Wizard of the Coast Black Star promos. So that's what I look for. And I look for things like that, things that you can talk about on identity to a set. And Sword and Shield did have a lot of those sets. Even like Silver Tempest with the Lugia, it had set identity. Lost Origins with a absolutely destroyingly strong character rare subset to that. Lost Origins still has a set identity to it. There are like, I don't know if I mentioned it, but like Champion's Path doesn't have that strong set identity to it, sadly, even though you think it would. Has Charizard on the pack work, Charizard on the side of the ETB, the Charizard V as the promo. Your 2 chase cards are Charizards. It's I guess in a way it has set identity, but sadly because that's the only identity that set has, that everything else in that was so lacking. But I guess you could even say there is an identity to that. So but yeah, and then talking about why Pokemon might not be in a bubble too is I think people are definitely underestimating like maybe how much of this is actually being open to. I think that there is a lot of this stuff being open. So if that's the case, and maybe the amount of this product that it's being sealed isn't as strong as we think it might be. Now, don't get me wrong. the people that are keeping this product sealed are definitely keeping more of it sealed than they were in the past. I know people personally who used to, at a best, keep one case of each product sealed. I know some people are now sitting on 10 to 20 cases of certain products sealed because they're trying to just build these future positions. Now, I think that could definitely like fall within that bubble talk, but where the issue might be is I don't think that percentage of people is as high as people might believe. I believe that when you start to talk about the percentage of people that are buying one booster box of these sets, I think that percentage is pretty high. But the people actually acquiring massive positions, so anything massive is, just throw out like greater than 2 cases. I think anything greater than 2 cases is like maybe not a massive, probably a bad word, but a large position is probably anything greater than 2 cases. I think the actual percentages of people acquiring positions that large is actually drastically lower than we think it is. And I think sometimes, and I do this mistake a lot, is I'm very, very often giving people way too much credit in this hobby, which is a good thing and a bad thing. But more often than not, I am just assuming that a lot of people are doing a lot of the things that I think they're doing, but in reality, they're not. I think the reality of the matter is people are just not acquiring as big of positions in this product as I think they are. I think the problem is, and this is where I have to realize my faults, and I recognize this. I am definitely surrounding myself currently in this hobby today, tomorrow, yesterday, with people that are doing that. So my views are definitely jaded. And I look at, what was I doing 5 years ago versus what am I doing today? And my plays, especially for modern, and the amount of modern that I'm acquiring, the modern that I'm keeping tucked away, is drastically larger. But I think I'm just maybe like very biased by the people that I'm hanging out with, because I think that number is larger than it actually is. So if that is the case, and that number isn't that large, like maybe the bubble isn't there because of that. Let's see. Quafam says he freaking loves PK. He's divulging all the secrets to long-term success, and as much as selfishly want to keep it to himself, he has nothing but mad respect for the honesty and sharing knowledge. Appreciate that. But I think that's another thing too, and Quafam brings up a good point when he brings up the knowledge, and I get it. It's kind of like cliche because it's in the name of my YouTube channel, but one of the things that are going to keep people around in this hobby longer than anything else, and is going to prevent Pokemon from being a bubble, is that knowledge. And the more knowledge that people acquire in this hobby, I think knowledge does a few things. One, knowledge prevents people from making poor decisions. But most importantly, knowledge keeps people wanting to, keep going. Keep learning about new stuff. Keep discovering stuff. And I always say this all the time. The amount of information that I've forgotten in this hobby is a staggering amount. Like, for the most part, I'm relatively good at like compartmentalizing information and being able to like kind of like pull that information out when I need it. But more times than not, I know I've read about it, or I know I've heard about certain stuff, but I can't even like remember stuff. So I think that's just part of this hobby, though, is just constantly acquiring more and more information and learning about the newer and newer things. And I think once you acquire that knowledge and I think it's being comfortable too. It's not even just about knowledge. It's just about being comfortable. But I think you become comfortable because of that knowledge. They're like, you can't have one without the other kind of thing. And the more comfortable people get in this hobby, the more. So when you are comfortable in this hobby, I think you are willing to take risks because you're being able to be more well-rounded on the risk, and you're able to quickly identify like the positives versus the negatives of stuff. And if you are taking into account the negatives of stuff, and you're willing to take into account like worst case scenarios, that bubble is really hard to form around people that are already like taking into account worst case scenarios. Because in order for a bubble to do that worst possible thing, which is at the end of my video title, it's pop. And if there's no ability for that bubble to pop, because people have already accounted for that worst case scenario, that pop becomes much less drastic. So I don't know what like 5 years from now in this hobby is going to work out to be, or 10 years from now. But I'll tell you what, when I look back on the height, which was 2020, 2021, did I think Pokemon was going to be stronger in 2023 than it was in 2021? I would have told you no. But I think, in fact, Pokemon is stronger, and maybe not market demand, even though market demand is crazy high right now. But I don't think it's at 2020 levels. But again, I'm comparing market demand today with literally the highest point in market demand in the entire history of this hobby. I don't think demand is at that level, but it's still, in comparison to the rest of this hobby, like far and away, like super high demand. If you told me in 2020 that I was going to be talking about this in 2023, seeing what I'm seeing, I probably wouldn't have believed you. I would have thought that we would have seen much more drastic retraces. That this is the hardest thing when it comes to bubble talk too. And I think this is going to be one of those ones what we kind of like go back and forth on all the time. Is Pokemon, in a way, as much as I hate to say it, they control their own destiny in this hobby. And Pokemon controls their own destiny because they control those printers. How much is Pokemon going to print? Because in reality, and this is the most simple, this is economics 101. This is the most simple way to boil it down. If demand is greater than supply, prices will go up. And if Pokemon is truly inherently conscious of that one very simple economics 101 factor, that as long as demand is greater than supply, prices continue to go up, that would mean that Pokemon is potentially extremely aware of secondary market prices, but more importantly, are not only just aware of secondary market prices, they want to keep secondary market prices high. Which, if that's the case, and Pokemon is strategically and purposely doing that, which their communications say different. So their actual official communications from Pokemon is, we are aware of low supply and we are printing to max capabilities. That is their official response. But if their unofficial response is, we need to keep this going for as long as we possibly can. If they continue to under-deliver and undersupply the market, the bubble will be really, really hard to pop when demand is easily eaten up. I don't know if Pokemon's doing that. I wouldn't rule it past them. So RN Genesis said 2-year bond sitting at 5%. Last time it was that high was 2007, and it's still climbing. So, yeah. Retrospect says, yeah, so much sealed modern out there. Why take a 5x in 6 months? Am I right? Watch out for the dump. This is the thing. But Pokemon isn't just sealed product, though. Pokemon is modern cards, too. Modern plays. Stuff that you think is the... And this is the thing, too, why we might not be in a bubble. This is like both, where we could be in a bubble, not be in a bubble, is why Pokemon has continued to allow certain plays to be so easy right now, today. There are plays that you actually... And I'm going to tell you a play right now that would be impossible for anybody that have lost money. And I mentioned it earlier today. The Scarlet and Violet Japanese promo, SV001, $20. It was like $17 to $20 at release. The Chinese promo, same card, English back, $6.99 at release. You can actually go on eBay, still pick both those cards up. The prices actually haven't swayed much. Do you know that, to my knowledge, there's not one... This is crazy to say. This is crazy when you think about how many people are in this hobby. Do you know that there's potentially not one single person in this entire hobby who lost money grading that card? Sit back and think about that. That is the arguably one of the most mass-produced promos we've ever seen. And I just told you that there's potentially not one person who graded that card themselves and lost money. That is insane. To tell me that success rate could potentially be 100% on a play like that. Now, how do plays like that keep presenting themselves? That means if plays like that could present themselves, where you could have a potential one, again, this is people that graded that card themselves. And if you know me, you know one thing more than anything else. You should be grading your own cards. You should not be buying Modern 10s. I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who bought that Modern 10 at crazy prices who lost money on that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying anybody who graded that card themselves. Listen very carefully to my words I use. Graded it themselves. If we live in a hobby right now that has plays that exist, that have the potential of no downside risk, how long can that keep going on for? And right now, it's going on, and it's happening over and over and over again. So if that's possible, which means the market is strong enough to absorb this and keep people's success rate at something at 100%, that is borderline bubble, borderline not bubble. I don't know. And the reason why I say not bubble is because if you have that much demand right now, how big of a drop could that cliff be? How many of those people that are allowing a play to, who are the buyers of that, allowing a play to be 100% success rate? What is the chances that those buyers can cause that cliff to drop so drastically? What event would now need to take place to more or less evaporate that entire buyer pool from the market? I don't know. I don't know if that buyer pool is getting to the point where it's actually too large to be evaporated. I don't know. Tom B says he graded a 6 on one of them. Holy cow, Tom. Sorry to hear that, buddy. Let's see. But, wow. Did it. 1 hour, 27 minutes, talking into the void, talking about why Pokemon is in a bubble and why Pokemon's not in a bubble. I'll tell you what, I'm leaning towards Pokemon's not in a bubble. I think it's just something different. I think it's something... I think there will be a calming period in Pokemon. I think the big difference that people don't talk about is they always want to talk about this fall off a cliff. I think anytime you look at a bubble graph, you always got this crazy peak, and then you have that initial drop, and then you have that bull trap, and then you just have that rock bottom. I think the problem is the Pokemon bubble, whatever, is just going to not play out like that. I think it's just going to be a much, more flatline type trajectory, where I think there will be a common period eventually in this hobby. Now, how long does that common period last? I have no clue. But I just don't think we are in the typical bubble. And I think when we eventually hit that calming period and the market does start to regulate itself and start to get back to what I would consider more a normal state, I think there's a lot of people who will look at a normalizing state as a crash. And those will be the people that don't have the true fundamentals of what this market actually is. Quafam again says, gotta go to dinner. Good luck, everyone. Enjoy the hobby, everyone. Appreciate it, Quafam, dude. You're a real one, man. RN Genesis says, I bet you by the end of the year you'll see a mass fire sale. I'm waiting for it, man. I think you probably would have said the same thing last year. I'm sure we could probably find you saying something similar to that, man. What does a fire sale look like? Who's fire selling and what are they selling? That would be the question they got to ask. It's like, what are they selling? He says smart people getting out. When did they get out? Did they get out a month ago? Because if they got out a month ago on sale product, like, they don't look smart right now. Like, that's the tricky thing. If you were like, oh, all the smart people got out of their sealed modern product plays in December, they look foolish in March. Like, they look really foolish because that means they potentially left off like probably close to 20% on the table between December and March. 20% is a, when you talk about investing, 20% in 2 months is a ridiculous amount of money. So he says people are selling for whatever they can. RN Genesis said they got out last year. Oh, they really look silly then. Is there any sealed product from last year to today that has gone down in price? He says what goes up is going to eventually come down. You're probably right. But I just don't know if it comes crashing down. Like I always say, a perfect example I always like to give in a booster box I always like to give is, I don't even know, what is Team Up at right now? It's like $1,000. It's probably more. What does it take for Team Up to get down to $400? Which again, $400 for a modern booster box is still a crazy amount of money. But what needs to happen to get Team Up from where it's at today to have all the buying pressure a booster box like that will have on the way down? There'll be a lot of buying pressure at different price points for a booster box like Team Up. What does it take to get that booster box down to 400? Because that's not a box that's, in my opinion, like on the table for reprints. I guess that would be the one thing. You can say if for whatever reason Pokemon just pulled out an ace out of their sleeve and said we're printing Team Up, but excluding reprints, which I don't think is likely, what does it take to get that Team Up booster box from where it's at today? What does it take to get to 400? I don't know. Like, that's the problem with like the bubble talk is even that thing crashes to 400, that's still a strong booster box. That was a booster box that came out in 2017. Team Up came out in. Cosmic Eclipse was, so you got Team Up, Unbroken Bonds, Unified Minds, and then Cosmic Eclipse came out November 2019, right? Yeah, 2018. 2018. Oh my God, time flies. So 2018. No, 2019. November 2019. I don't know. Anyways, it came out November 2019, I think. Like, that's a set that's only 5 years old. Team Up. Like, what's it going to take to have that thing crash down to 400? I don't know. Daryl Wong said, would the community be mad or happy if they reprint Team Up? Honestly, Daryl, I think the community as a whole would be happy because I think we talk about it. I mentioned it earlier. I don't think there's a lot of people who actually have like the big positions of sealed modern like I think. And then that's just one step further. I just don't think there's a lot of people out there that acquire massive positions of Team Up because I think so much of this hobby is so new to this hobby that they just honestly weren't even around, which sounds crazy, I'm sure, to a lot of people. I think that's just the truth. They just weren't around at the end of Sun and Moon timeline. So, yeah, and then Quafam brings up another good point. He goes, the thing about time, if you buy all sets at release between 80 and 120, does it matter if it goes down to 400? Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying at 400. Like, does it matter? Like, I guess, but is that like a bottom of the barrel crash, everything crash and burn? RN Genesis says, what is a sealed booster box going to buy when you need to buy groceries? I think people still have groceries. So Pokedama said, opinions on PokeTubers calling the Scarlet and Violet era bad, even though they've never opened any Japanese product or Scarlet and Violet EX. Give me an example. So my real early thoughts on Scarlet and Violet were it seemed like it might have been a dud, but that was before any cards were actually released. You know, after we saw like that Gyarados and we saw that they're going to do those character rare cards in there, and I think it's like the Gardevoir card has it and has a very similar like it was weird. Listen, when people are going to think I work for a Pokemon company, there was a video I made talking about like some of like the character, I don't know what they're really called, like character cards and legendary treasures, showing like how different Pokemon like go through their time, and they're with the little kid, and then it's the little kid when he's a little bit older until eventually like he's a grandparent, stuff like that. And like a week later, Scarlet and Violet made the same exact type of character card, and it was super weird. Like I just talked about it randomly on a live, and then that card came out. So I don't work for Pokemon. That was just like very lucky timing. But no, I think there's some real cool character rare cards coming out in the Scarlet and Violet block too. So I haven't really heard a lot of people calling Scarlet and Violet a dud, and I think there's a lot of people that are hyped about the silver borders. I could take it or leave it. Like it doesn't really bother me. Yellow borders never bothered me, but Qualfom said Team Up has a better chance of getting to 1500 than it does going down to 150. I agree with that statement 100%. Like I think it would take a lot to get that booster box down to 150. All right, guys, I did it. Hour and 35 minutes. I don't know. I just talked. I hope this was fun. This was the first time I ever tried to do this, where I started the beginning of the video doing why Pokemon is in a bubble, and then doing the end of the video talking about why Pokemon's not in a bubble. I hope I was able to do it. It was actually really tough. I wanted to like stop myself a lot of times and like try to argue against my facts, and I think I kind of did that a little bit. But listen, guys, appreciate every single one of you guys. Could do me a favor. I don't ask for anything. Only thing I ever ask for is you hit that like button. And if you're new to this channel and you just made it to the end of this video and you're not subscribed, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. I do a lot of lives like this. It's always fun. I'm always trying to challenge myself, change up videos when I can. With that said, appreciate you guys. I'll catch you on the next video.